Hello, welcome to my easy to understand guide to what to expect from an A-level Component 2 exam paper. This video is just going to give you a brief look at a sample paper so you can see what it looks like, and I'm going to talk you through things like hints and tips, timing, and what to expect in terms of the questions. Proviso, I cannot predict questions. I don't work for the exam board. I have no insights into what could or wouldn't come up. So this basically just to give you an overview of what to expect in terms of the wording or the structure or the style and layout of a paper. So as you can see on the screen here, what we've got is a sample paper for component 2 on the A-level Media Studies exam. The good thing is that it does give you the timing at the front. So it says that the paper is going to be 2 hours and 30 minutes. So it gives you a little bit of information about the exam paper. And then later down the page, it does tell you a bit more about timing. So it says you are advised to spend 50 minutes on each section of the paper. So it very clearly tells you how long to spend on each section. Each section is worth the same marks. So that's why you can spend the same amount of time on all 3 sections. Now, unlike component 1, component 2 has optional questions and sections depending on what your school has studied. So it's important that as we go through this, you don't panic, just like you're not going to panic in the real exam, and you're going to look carefully for the questions that relate to your school and what you have been taught. So it says there's going to be 3 sections, and it says you have to answer 3 questions, 1 from section A, 1 from section B, and 1 from section C. So that's easy enough, okay? And if we scroll through, you'll have a look at what I mean. So section A will always be the TV section. Now, some schools study option 1, which is life on Mars and the bridge. Some schools study option 2, which is humans and the returned. And some schools study option 3, which is the jinx and no burkas behind bars. So what I don't want to happen is I don't want you to get in the exam, open up the paper, see a question about life on Mars and have a breakdown because you've not been taught it. You need to be prepared mentally, right, I'm going to open up the paper, section A, where is the section about the topics that I have studied? So for example, at my school, we study humans and the returned, which is option 2. So my students will look for that option 2, humans and the returned. The instructions are at the top of the page. So it says answer 1 question in this section. So you're either going to answer number 1 about life on Mars and the bridge, number 2 about humans and the returned, or number 3 about the jinx and no burkas behind bars. And it says each question is in 2 parts. They won't always be in 2 parts, just to make it confusing for you. Sometimes it will just be 1 question and sometimes it will be 2. You have to look at that just to make sure you understand it. But essentially, as long as you are answering the questions in the section you have studied, that's the most important thing. So, for example, in this one, my students, like I said, study option 2. So there's a 2-part question, A and B, both worth 15 marks. I have seen some exam papers where they're not equally weighted. So 2A is worth like 5 or 10 marks and 2B is worth like 15 or 20 or whatever it is, 25. So, but what you need to know is it should be 30 marks for the whole section. Okay, and you can see that if it is 2 questions that you have to answer, it will be one will be about one product and the other question will be about the other product. So here we've got 1 question about humans and 1 about the returned. If it appears as 1 question, it will normally ask you to refer to both of those products you've studied. So if it was 1 question, for example, in this section for humans and returned, it might say to what extent could the set episode of humans and the returned be seen to, I don't know, reflect social contexts or whatever the question might be. So they could combine both products into 1 question, or if it's 2 separate questions, it will normally be 1 about 1 product you've studied and 1 about another. It's exactly the same when we scroll down to section B, which is the magazine section. This is a good example of where they've just got 1 question, but they mention 2 of or both products you've studied. So your school might study option 1, which is women and adbusters, and they've got 1 question here which asks about women and adbusters for 30 marks. My school study option 2, which is women's realm and huck, and they've got 1 question here that asks about women's realm and huck for 30 marks, and so on. You've got the Vogue and the big issue one down at the bottom as well. And then you go down to section C, which is media in the online age, and there are only 2 options for schools to study, either Alfie Day's Pointless blog and Desi Mag, or Zoella and Attitude. some of these texts change year on year. So, for example, Pointless Blog and Desimag, I think Desimag has been changed now to another set text. So please don't freak out if you're reading this and you think I've not studied that one. My students are studying Zoella and Attitude, and you can see it's another 30-mark question that asks about both Zoella and Attitude. So that is essentially how component 2 will look. And it's much simpler than component 1. Just 3 sections, answer all the questions in the option that you've studied, either 1 or 2 questions for each topic. So reasonably simple to work out timings. And this component 2, the only real difference between component 2 and component 1 is that it's probably in more depth, less potential set texts, but in more depth. And this is the section, or this is the exam, I should say, where they potentially could ask you about a very specific theory. So, for example, in this particular exam paper that you're seeing here, they very specifically ask about David Gauntlet for the magazine questions. And in the first section, they very specifically ask about postmodernism. So you could very well get asked about a very particular theory in component 2. So you have to know your theories. I've got videos on all of them if you want to watch them. So that's component 2. Any questions, pop them below and I shall see if I can answer them. If you haven't already checked out my video about component 1, please do, because I go through component 1 in that video.